They also track you to try and work out when you're likely to make a purchase, because they want to pounce before you actually make that decision. Sorry,
if you open your browser and you put it in the browser, does that stop that tracking?
I don't have the...
Incognito browsing only stops your own family members on that computer seeing what you have actually gone to. ISP, ASIO, all the government agencies, the telecoms actually track where you've gone to from your computer point out.
For text purpose client profiling, what sort of data source we need?
Let me just say before I answer that question, we're not doing any of this fingerprinting for taxpayers, so that would require sanction from the top, and I can assure you there's nothing like this happening yet. But for that to happen, we would need, like all the marketing companies do, we need data from every possible source we can get it, the demographic data, the geographic, psychographic, because the more data we can get, the more we can find things in that data that could provide reliable and valid indicators of whatever it is that's being assessed. Okay, I'll hand up to Tony.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm the reason you're here today, so I hope you're enjoying yourselves. I'm also the least important speaker of the day, so to catch up some time, I will try and be quite quick. But to start with, I wanted to start with a magic trick. So to represent how you use data and metadata and open source data and things like that. So you will see here that we get our magic wand because we want to solve a problem, and we tap our book and we have nothing. So we go in search of data, and eventually, just to prove that there is nothing in here at all, hi everybody, we go in search of our data cube. So we go data, and we do get a data cube. So we have our data cube, which we then place on the book and go 1, 2, 3, and then, if I remembered right, we then have an outline of what we want. But of course, me being a person, so we'll go back again and show that there's nothing in here. And then, of course, for me, I want all data. I want open source data again. So I go 1, 2, 3, open source, and there is our open source data in all different types of formats. So I put that on there and I go 1, 2, 3. And of course, what does metadata and open source data do? But it colors our data sets. And then finally, we realize that the question wasn't exactly what we wanted and we have to start again. So we go back and it's down to the beginning. So with that, I thought you'd have a little bit of a magic show. Understanding cohort analysis with open source data sets for strategic, operational and tactical purposes. This is something that I have been working on for the last 20 years, on and off pre my UTS days and my ATO days. And this is going to be, talk is going to be described in very, very general terms, or I'm going to be arrested, and other different things around the stuff that I'm talking about. So this is the capstone. The capstone is a system approach. Sorry, I'm a bit puffed from running. This here basically means that You can see there that it's on weekday minimum, and those roll up into there, and then that section rolls up into there, and that section rolls up into there. So a systems approach means that there is a bottom part that can then contributes to a child, that then contributes to a parent, that then contributes to a grandparent, that then contributes to a great-grandparent. And a capstone is the final bit that's actually on top. The other thing here is that this is, you've all seen DNA and DNA type profiling. This is very similar, where we have 4 different key performance indicators or measurements, and we actually have a demographic, a demographic, a demographic, and a demographic. And what it does is this actually sequences everything along for an entity or a target or a source or a cohort, and no matter what level you want to describe, and then you can actually compare and you can see the variations and the movements between. And so that's another part of it. Open source. This is this is my diagram that basically shows you that there is nothing that you do inside your normal everyday lives, your working lives, your career lives, whichever, that are not represented in recreational lives, that is not represented in some way, in some data source around the world that you can actually get. And also you use these yourselves. There's communication, there's Google, there's recipes, there's shopping, there's a whole range. And one of the struggles for government in some ways is how do we actually capture all those different data sources that do exist, and how can we actually incorporate them into what government needs to do to try and understand and then progress its usage of it. So these are the 4 steps that I've developed in my one. There's the capstone technique, which is basically about turning everything in the data set into an inclusive data set rather than an exclusive data set. So an exclusive data set, you're trying to get rid of everything you can to make it nice and slimline. An inclusive data set is putting everything you can and representing variables in multiple different ways, and also as many times as you can, to give you as much flexibility in the tools that you're trying to use. Data sequencing, which is what I've just mentioned, the cohort analysis, and then footprinting. And footprinting is the final cohort part of the analysis. And what it is, I'll explain in a few seconds where I've done this in a practical example. There's another system, a system slide that just actually shows some of the formulas are actually over there. So the advantage of this technique is that you can have variables of any size, any shape, any mathematical, categorical, ordinal, interval ratio scales. They are then, the categorics, and are then unified. They then go up and they're transformed into a number between, it used to be 1 to 99, it's now 1 to 53. And then they are all put together, and with the digital hash and the other part, the reshaping, that then goes up into a combined scale, and then that is then put down. And because the digital hash that I invented compresses but actually carries the unique characteristics of the numerical combinations with them, means that that cell there represents that, which represents those down there. So it can actually be compressed or decompressed, but because it's sequential, it can't be re-engineered. So there is actually a type of loose encryption system with it too. Applications. This is one of the areas where this has actually been used. So this is the onshore example. So what I have been doing with law enforcement and with fire and rescue and those is we've been actually looking at geographic locations. We have then started to get the demographics that we actually get from the ABS census data through the table building tool. Then we actually included time. So you can see that there's a time sequence there. We then went to geographic information and we got sunrise, sunset, moonrise and moonset. Then we had event data that actually happened. So if there was, for instance, a fire or a traffic accident or other areas, what were the weather conditions at the time? And we were actually able to then plot all these and then do some machine learning to start to see where it actually impacted and where the gaps were. And with the footprinting, what we were interested in, if this side here and that side there, for instance, had exactly the same behavioural end results, if you like, but the demographics were different, or the demographics between here and there were exactly the same, but the events were different, what other characteristics could we use machine learning for to try and explain what we were possibly losing in the model? Externally, I had a look at the Panama Papers, which is all open source at the moment that has been released, and there's some of the statistical versions of what it actually is at the moment. So the data that I was interested in was where we have a person in a country who undertakes a financial transaction, who then invests that financial transaction into what is called a jurisdiction, and then again the year that actually happened, and then the year that where they collected their money back. And what we did was, so that then became the identifier. And once we had the identifier, we were then able to look at the variation here between what changed in economic and political stability and governance and law enforcement on the country that they actually invested in and on the country that they actually live in themselves. So what we were interested in doing was trying to find what environmental factors from the United Nations and the World Bank open source data and the EU and some others could then be able to look and see what triggered an investment response or a withdrawal response. Then, once we had that footprint with machine learning, and by the way, for 215 countries from the years 2002 to 2014 equals 4.3 million footprints that we were interested in. But when we looked at those that were reportedly Australian within there, that then actually went down to about 19,000, and there are some other sort of statistical ones in there where we could actually see what happened. But what we were interested in finding out is now, where we've mapped that behaviour in the footprints that we know about with Panama, it should be possible then to map that behaviour into those economic and law enforcement conditions in the other 4.2 million footprints, to then see if we could find that similar behaviour happening that was not associated with Panama, that could be associated with some other behaviour or we're doing it. So this one here is just the actual examples of some of the data structure and stuff. These are, so I promised I would be quick, these are a series of links where you can actually go into YouTube and you can see a movie on how the capstone and how it works. And then there's a series of articles of there. Finally, the other one is, these are just some other posts that I thought may have been of interest. Capstone is also being used as a technique now for data matching. So we are now starting to see where you've got an individual letter in a name, and because you have variations in names and spelling and orders of the letter, And we want to clean up that data, so we're now looking at a nearest neighbour approach through Capstone to be able to align those data sets better and to be able to sort it in. And the final and latest thing it's being used for is the cognitive universe. And basically this is a new modelling technique that I've come up with that uses capstones, which basically says that you can actually model anything in the entire universe, because we're in the material universe. You can't actually model everything because there's no constant. Light isn't a constant, gravity isn't a constant, there's nothing unique. Hawking's and Einstein and many others have tried to find a commonality and they can't. However, if you take it over into a cognitive universe to describe it, there are several things that everything in the universe has in common. One thing is that we can either observe it or conceive of it. A second thing is that we can actually label it, and if we can label it, it fits into a library classification system, which means that we have a meta framework to be able to map it. And we can either measure or estimate its cause and effect on something else. So by using those different ones together, it then becomes actually possible to be able to map everything from a decision to using it within gameplay, to be using it within surveys, to look at compliance issues, to look at decision streams and a whole range of different things. Unfortunately, I only finally published the paper on this last night at about 10 PM, so there isn't a link there. But if anyone was really interested in it, they could email me and I could send them the LinkedIn Pulse article if they were interested. And with that, I'm hoping that I've caught up with time, and so we'll have a quick 10-minute recess where we're coming back to listen to Dr. Eugene, who is a very, very interesting speaker. He's been a friend of mine for a long, long time, and he's going to let you in on some of the secrets of forming analytics teams and analytics units and things like that. Thank you.